So we tonight are closing out our series that we've been in for the month of January, New Year, New You. And if you haven't been here for any of the weeks, you can catch up and listen on our podcast, or you can watch it on our YouTube channel, The Harbor Church. But basically, this whole series has been centered around this idea that if I want to see change in my life, if I want new things to happen, that requires me to make some new decisions. And so as it pertains to our walks with God, we've been looking at a different question every week for these last few weeks, and we've been making a decision and making a choice that hopefully would help frame the trajectory that I'm headed on this year in my relationship with God. And so I'm not going to sum up every week that we've done. You can go check those out if you want. But last week, we talked about the goal of our walk with God, the goal of our relationship with God, and how it's so important to define what the goal is. It's so important to define where you're headed, because when you can define what the goal is, it helps give you direction in how to get there. And we talked about, that quote that if you aim at nothing, you're going to hit it every time. And so even when it comes to my relationship with God, I need to figure out what is the goal. And so we talked about how it's natural for the goal of my relationship with God to be all my desires and all of my expectations being met. But the healthier goal and the more biblical goal is that my desire for this year is to leave that into God's hands. Say, God, I trust you with what happens and with what doesn't happen. But my main objective this year in drawing close to you is that I need to be more like you. That my desire this year, what would qualify as a successful year for me 12 months from now will be if I can look back on my life and say, you know what? I've grown with God, and I feel like I'm able to show patience a little bit more like Jesus showed patience. And I'm able to show some grace a little bit more like Jesus was able to show grace. And I'm able to have a little bit more compassion and have a burden for things that I didn't before. But Jesus is changing me from the inside out. And my goal in life is that I am always reflecting who Jesus is and what he's done for me. And so tonight, as we close out this series, I want to double down on this idea of this goal of becoming more like Jesus. As this is what we're setting before us, and as this is the framework for what we're going to allow into our lives and push out of our lives, and what we are going to allow to shape the perspective that we have for this new year, I want to double down on this idea of becoming more like Jesus. And I want to pose this question to you tonight. Does the life that you are pursuing seek to serve you more than others? Does the life that I'm pursuing seek to serve me more than others? Now, if you're in here and you have grown up going to church, let me talk like Christian talk, church talk. Does your calling, does your God-given purpose, the thing that you feel like you were created for, does that revolve around others? And if your calling, the thing that you feel like God has purposed you to do, doesn't revolve around others, then it must just revolve around you. The reality is that when you study Jesus, you realize that Jesus' life was completely shaped towards others. That Jesus' focus, that Jesus' goal was always centered around others. And so if I want to become more like Jesus, Jesus says of himself, I came not to be served, but I came to serve. I came to give my life as a ransom for many. And we talked last week about how Jesus, he loves and Jesus serves not for a return from you, but Jesus loves you and he serves you from a place of love. And so he's not doing it to get something from you. He's just doing it because he loves you. And so if my life is going to start to become more like Jesus, and my goal is that, God, I need you to shape my heart. God, I need you to do a work in me so that I can start reflecting Jesus to others. It's going to take me answering this question to say, so the life that I've been pursuing, the calling that I've been prioritizing, the purpose that I've been looking at and shooting for, does that revolve around others? Because if it doesn't revolve around others and how I'm supposed to love others and how I'm supposed to serve others, well, then the only other option is that it must just revolve around me. And I think what a lot of people would come to find out is that if you could dedicate this year to say, you know what? Instead of me shooting to gain value from every relationship that I have, instead of me, trying to gain value from everything in my life, why don't I focus on just giving value in every relationship that I have? Then you would start to realize that as you are focused on giving value, now you have this ability to receive the value that God has been speaking over you all along. That as you start to realize, hey, I don't need to fight for me, you start to realize God is fighting for me. When you can stop promoting yourself, you realize that God is promoting you. You can stop honoring yourself, you realize that God is honoring you. If you could just let go of your life for a second, if you could just lose your life for a second, you'd find it. You'd realize that God has had a hold of it all along. And if you could just take your hand off the wheel, Jesus, take the wheel. If you could just take your hand off the wheel for a moment, you would realize that God is not playing this sick game of hide and seek and saying, I have this plan for your life, but you can't find it. If you could just take your hand off the wheel for a second, you would realize that God's desire is to lead you and to guide you into this life that he created you for. But so many of us, maybe without even realizing it, maybe have slipped back into this mindset of it's all about me. So this calling that I'm pursuing, this purpose that I'm pursuing, this thing that I'm waiting on God for, I need to ask myself, does it serve others or does it serve me? Does it revolve around others or does it revolve around me? And when you can answer that question, you can start to draw a conclusion. Is that my dream or is that God's dream for my life? Are those my desires or are those God's desires? Is that my heart speaking or is that the heart of God speaking? So I want to walk you through a quick story really quick. A story that some of you have heard before. And if you have your Bibles, you can turn to John chapter 13. I'm going to give you a little context if you're turning there or typing it into your phone. We're going to put it up on the screen, so if you don't have it, no worries. But I want to give you a quick context of what we're about to read. So Jesus is about to have his last meal with his closest friends, with his disciples, with his companions, with these students that have been traveling with him and given their life to follow this guy around and to learn from him and just be his disciples. And Jesus, knowing that he's about to die, knowing that he's about to get betrayed, knowing that he's about to give his life for everyone, knows that this is the last meal. And so Jesus, he says to his disciples, go find a place, secure a spot, and prepare a meal, and we need to have this dinner. I don't think they really grasped the idea that this was going to be the last time that they were going to have to really hang out with Jesus, but Jesus knew exactly what it was. And so Jesus is setting this up for a time where he can spend these last few moments, these last couple hours with these guys. And how many people know that if you're about to leave for something, if you're about to go away on a trip, and maybe you're talking to your spouse and there's some things that you need them to remember, you're going to make sure you repeat yourself right at the end, right? I'm like, hey, babe, could you lock the door? Yep. And then 2 minutes later, I'm like, hey, babe, remember, lock the door. And then I walk out and I open it. Hey, babe, could you lock the door after I leave? You know, like, I'm going to constantly keep throwing it in there right at the end because I need you to remember it. You start to see when you look at this Last Supper, Faith, don't hate me. When you start to look at this last meal, that Jesus is highlighting some things that he needs his disciples to take out of these last few years. That Jesus is bringing their attention to some areas, bringing their attention to some things that he's saying, listen, as I'm about to go, this is where I need your focus. This is what I need you to remember. This is what I need you to see. And so we're going to jump into this story. We're going to read a few verses, and I encourage you, I'm not going to read the whole chapter. I encourage you to go back and do it. We're going to skip around. You're going to see as we start to read. But there is so much foreshadowing in what we're about to read of Jesus washing the sins of all of us, of Jesus giving his life as a ransom for everyone. And so if you have time when you go home tonight, I encourage you to read all of chapter 13. But let's skip around for a second. We're going to start in verse 1. It says, now before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart out of this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. During supper, when the devil had already put it into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come from God and was going back to God, he rose from supper. He laid aside his outer garments, and taking a towel, tied it around his waist. Then he poured water into a basin, and he began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel that was wrapped around him. We're going to skip down to verse 12. Verse 12 says that when he had washed their feet and put on his outer garments and resumed his place, he said to them, do you understand what I've done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for so I am. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example that you also should do just as I have done to you. Truly, truly, I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them. Do me a favor. Could you turn to your neighbor and start to take their shoes off? I'm totally kidding. So, some people are like, I'm out. I knew this church was weird. I knew this was a cult. Some of you who grew up in a weird church, you're like, too soon, because that stuff happened, and it's not funny. We're not going to do that here, okay? I shouldn't be joking around about this stuff. Anyways, what an amazing picture. We're going to try to get it back to a serious moment. I shouldn't have done that. We're going to try to get back to a serious picture for a second. You see this instance where Jesus, at this Last Supper, he interrupts the meal, and he does this amazing thing where he washes the feet of his disciples. And then when he's done with that, he then looks at them, and he says, do you understand what I just did? I don't want you to miss what just happened. I want to make sure, do you understand what I just did? Cool, you understand it. So let me just say this. If I'm your master, if I'm your Lord, if I'm your leader, and I'm willing to do that for you, then you need to go and do this for everyone around you. Jesus says, I have done this as an example for you. So as we talked about last week, setting the goal in mind that Jesus, over this next year, my main desire, my main goal, my heart, I need to be more like you. Well, tonight, I just want to look at the example that Jesus left us. As Jesus is spending these last few moments with his disciples, with these men who are about to go spread this message to the world, these men that he had entrusted with this message. So he's about to depart them. He's leaving them with this as a picture, as an example of what calling looks like, of what purpose looks like. So I want to look at this for a second. I'm going to point a few things out to you, and at the end, I'll give you a few things to write down, but I don't want you to stress about writing anything down yet. I'll give that to you at the end, but I want you just to hear this for a minute. And as we're talking through this, I want you to do me a favor and try to visualize what we're talking about. So in verse 4, you read that Jesus stands up and he interrupts the meal. Have you ever noticed reading the Gospels that Jesus was forever getting interrupted? Constantly. He was always getting interrupted. And the crazy thing is that the Bible, the gospel, it emphasizes the interruptions. Have you ever noticed that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John never really give much attention to where he was headed and why he was headed there or when he was supposed to get there? But the gospel always emphasizes who he encountered along the way. Now, like the disciples, I view it as interruptions because I don't get it. Because in reality, in my life, in the context of my life, I'm always more focused on where I'm going and when I'm supposed to get there and what it's supposed to look like. And so anything that detracts from that, anything that would interrupt that, anything that would take a left turn, anything that wouldn't go according to the plan that I've had in my head, I view as an interruption. But the things that the disciples viewed as interruptions, Jesus was actually viewing as interventions. These moments where they encounter a hurting person, where they encounter a sick person, where they encounter a demon-possessed person, or somebody who just needs Jesus. The disciples are like, man, we got to go. We keep getting interrupted. Like, Jesus, what are we doing here? Man, we got somewhere to be. And Jesus is like, you don't understand. This is why I'm here. The interruptions are the point. I came to the earth to intervene in people's life. And as Christians, we are called to become more like Jesus, but we don't value and we give no patience to or no attention to interruptions. And we wonder why we're so frustrated all the time. We wonder why we can't understand the things of God sometimes. Well, maybe it's because the things of God, they're so much more focused on the who when you and I are so much more focused on the what, when, and where. And if I could just take a step back and to say, you know what, it's so much less important where I end up and when I get there, but along the way, I'm going to value and have patience and have compassion for the people in the journey. That if I'm going to be like Jesus, I will always value the who over the when, what, and where. That when life takes a turn, that I'm going to embrace it and say, okay, God, so what do you have for me? Who am I supposed to encourage? Who am I supposed to be here with? I want to brag on one of our guys in here, close friend, Chris White. Where are you at, Chris White? Chris White. He's not going to raise his hand. He's embarrassed. He's in the back. In the back. Chris W. White. If you guys don't know Chris White, you need to know Chris White. He's the man. But I want to brag on him for a second. You know, I've seen something over the last year kind of transpire in his life, and it illustrates this in the most amazing way. Chris has such an amazing heart. And Chris has a call of God on his life. And he knows that he is called to just minister to people. And so Chris has dedicated his life. He's a Christian school teacher at a private school. And if you have ever been around him, or if you've ever gotten the privilege to see him teach, or to see him lead chapel, or to see him at work, you know that he is impacting students' lives. He's impacting faculty's lives and staff's lives, and having such an incredible impact in that community and in that school. But in case you didn't know, private Christian school teachers, they're not balling out. They don't make a lot of money. And so, Chris is at a point in life where he has some plans, and he has some things that he wants to do. He has things coming up. And so financially, he's trying to be smart. And, he was wrestling over this past year of like, God, I feel like I'm supposed to be here. I feel like I'm supposed to be pouring into these kids, but I'm not able to make it financially. And I'm really struggling because I don't understand if I feel like this is where I'm supposed to be, and I feel like I'm supposed to do ministry. How come the finances aren't really lining up? And, just getting a little frustrated. And so he got to the point where he needed to pick up a second job. And so he started driving for Lyft. If you don't know what Lyft is, it's like Uber, but it's better, right, Chris? Staying on, way better. I'm a company man. So Chris started driving for Lyft. And so where you're going to make the most amount of money in Lyft is on the weekends and on the nights when people are usually too stoned or too drunk to get home. And they're pouring out of clubs or pouring out of bars, and they need a ride. And so, he's sacrificing sleep sometimes till 4 or 5 in the morning, driving people around, but he's making good money that's able to supplement what he's doing. But all along, there's this part of him that when he's exhausted, and when he's still trying to do the ministry, and when he's still trying to do what he feels like God has called him to do, he's like, man, this is just so inconvenient. I wish I just didn't have this interruption where I needed a second job. Like, God, it'd be really cool if you could just provide what I need to be able to do the ministry that's before me. And was really just struggling with this interruption in his life, how inconvenient this was. And he told our team a few months ago, and we were talking, he said, man, I felt like I had this moment where I was frustrated with God, and then this light bulb went off where God said, what you're viewing as an interruption to your life is actually the purpose that I have for you. You have a captive audience in your car every night. You want to do ministry, you have people that need hope. You have people that are lost. You have people that are broken. You have people that are hurting getting into your car. A captive audience every single night. I do have a call on your life. And the thing that you think that's been delaying it, or the thing that you think has been interrupting it or making it more inconvenient, is actually me bringing the purpose right to you in your car. And so from that moment, Chris said, okay. So he started playing worship music every time someone got in the car. He started praying before he would pick somebody up. God, what do you want me to say to this person? What kind of questions do you want me to ask this person? How do you want me to encourage this person tonight? Show me what this person is going through. And so over the last 6 months, this guy has testimony after testimony after testimony of miraculous things that are happening as he's driving people to and from bars, to and from clubs, back to their house, of God just using him saying, I'm open to the interruption. I'm open to the inconvenience, because this is what it's about. Because it's not about how much money I should be making. It's not about where I thought I would be at this point in my life, or what I thought I would be doing. It is all about the who. And God, if you're bringing these people into my life, then I'm going to be faithful with the people that you put in front of me. I wonder how many of us, we've been frustrated, and we have wrestled feeling like, man, I just didn't see things going down this way. I just didn't see life really looking like this, and it is frustrating for me, and it's inconvenient for me, and God is just saying, man, if you could put less value on where you think you're headed and who I bring to you along the way, you can start to value and start to see that this is the purpose that I have for you. Not only would you get a lot more joy out of life, but your eyes would be open to who you were created to be and why I've put you here. So Jesus, he interrupts the middle of the meal, which was crazy. I mean, Jesus was the guest of honor. There's no reason why he should have stood up. They should have been waiting on him. And not only does he doesn't just stand up at the end of the meal, he stands up in the middle of the meal. So unlike other places in the gospel where he was getting interrupted, Jesus is now the interruption. So Jesus stands up, and as he interrupts, what Jesus is doing is he is creating an opportunity to serve the people around him. So he stands up and he interrupts the meal. The next thing that Jesus does, as he stands up, and I'm sure the conversation stopped for a second because like, what is he doing? What is he doing standing up? Well, then it says that Jesus, he removes his outer garment. And so this is pretty significant because the outer garment was usually the nicest thing that you owned. The outer garment, please don't think this coat is the nicest thing that I own. It was $30 from H&M. You know what? I don't care about what you think. That was a joke from week 2 if you missed it. Jesus, he lays down his outer garment. And so in these days, again, this is usually the nicest thing that you owned. It was usually a seamless piece of fabric that was really nice, and it was what people saw. So it represented your dignity. It represented your honor. It represented what you wanted people to see. Now, this is what's so crazy about this action on a couple different fronts. If we can back up to verse 3, I want to read this to you. It says, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, that he had come from God and that he was going back to God, he rose from supper, laid aside his outer garments, and taking a towel, he tied it around his waist. You know what's so crazy about that? When you and I are made aware of a little bit of success that we've had, when you and I achieve something, even small, the natural tendency, the natural temptation is to feel a little good about ourselves. And as you're faced with your success, and as you start to elevate yourself in your mind, maybe you don't do it outwardly, but inwardly you start to elevate yourself. What you're doing is you're putting a gap between you and everybody else. But what's amazing is that as Jesus, knowing who he was, knowing that he was the Son of God, knowing why he had came here, knowing that he was about to give his life for all of these men, for all of their mistakes, and that he was going to return to heaven to sit at the right hand of the Father and be exalted above anything and everything for eternity. When you and I would have elevated ourselves, Jesus actually got lower. Faced with who he is, knowing who he was, recognizing who he was, Jesus actually humbles himself. So he stands up, he interrupts dinner, and then he takes off the thing that everyone could see. The dignity, the honor, the pride, the self-respect. He takes it off and he lays it down. Now, this wasn't just symbolic of laying down your pride, but he was doing this out of function as well. Your pride will impede you from loving people the way that Jesus loves people. Caring about what others think about you will impede your ability to serve people the way that Jesus served people. So Jesus, in the midst of his students, in the midst of his pupils, in the midst of his disciples, the Messiah, the Master, the Son of God, interrupts the meal, and he sheds off this garment that everyone could see. Now, the third thing that Jesus did is as he sheds this garment, then it says that he picked up a towel and he tied this towel around his waist. Now, I don't have a towel with me tonight, but I want to illustrate this for you really quick. So, I feel like a lot of Christians, we get to the point where we realize for me to be Christ-like means that I need to lay down my pride. But there's a big difference between laying down your pride and then putting on humility. There's a big difference between taking off the outer garment and then actually putting the towel on. And where a lot of Christians get in trouble is that you know that you're not supposed to be prideful, so you attempt to take pride off. And you attempt to be humble, but because you've never taken it to the level of, well, let me put the towel on and serve the people around me, that's when humility starts to turn to false humility, because if it's not about others, it's still about you. So Jesus, he takes off the outer garment so that it wouldn't impede the towel. He lays down his pride, he lays down his own self-interest, he lays down his own dignity and his own honor, so that then he could put the towel around his waist. Now, I want to picture this for a second. I want to picture what this looked like. Jesus, the Messiah, standing up in the middle of dinner with no outer garment and a towel tied around his waist. You know what's amazing about this? If anybody were to walk into the room who didn't know what was going on, who wasn't invited to the party, there would have been no confusion of who was serving who. The dude standing up in the middle of the room with no outer garment and the towel around his waist, washing people's feet, that's the servant. When people look at your life and look at my life, there should be no confusion of if I'm living to serve myself or if I'm living to serve others. If people pop into my life, or even the people that are closest to me, there should never be confusion if I'm pursuing this life to be more like Jesus. If people are, is Scott living for him? Is he living to serve him, or is he, man, that dude is selfless. He's not just living for him and his own self-interest, but he's actually living to serve other people. There should be no confusion. Now, I want to picture for a second what this looked like, because it doesn't say that Jesus just rinsed their feet off. It doesn't say that. It actually says that Jesus put water into a basin, and then he put a towel around his waist, and then he got down and he washed their feet, and it actually says that he was wiping their feet. So the towel that is tied around Jesus' waist, he is wiping off the dirty feet of his disciples. Now, listen, that'd be gross enough if it was modern day. Back then, when they didn't have paved sidewalks and paved roads and everyone wore open-toed sandals, this was disgusting. People's feet were nasty. I mean, people's feet are nasty already, okay? But they were nasty. They were dirty. And so Jesus is willing to touch these men's disgusting, unkept, dirty feet, and he's willing to not just spray them with the garden hose from a safe distance away so nothing splashes on them. How some of us are like, man, you need Jesus. You need Jesus. Dude, you should go talk to a pastor. You should check out a church. Don't check out my church, but you should go check out a church. Jesus wasn't spraying a garden hose from 10 feet away. Jesus was actually down with a foot in his hand, and he was actually wiping the feet with the towel that he was wearing. So in other words, Jesus was wearing the dirt of all the men. Every foot that he washed, every person that he served, he got a little dirtier, the towel that he was wearing around his waist. If you and I are going to serve people the way that Jesus served people, if we're going to love people the way that Jesus loved people, that means that we need to be willing to at sometimes get a little messy, to at sometimes get a little, our lives of comfortability get a little inconvenienced at times. That I'm willing to go into a situation that maybe isn't black and white and maybe takes me way out of my comfort zone, but it's not about my comfort. It's actually about me serving people. And so I'm willing to get a little messy with somebody, and I'm willing if I get a little dirty, because I'm not serving people for what you think of me or what I look like. I got a towel around my waist, not for me, but for the person that I'm here supposed to serve. And so Jesus is washing these dudes' feet, getting dirtier and dirtier as he goes. And this job was so dirty that typically the host, if they were wealthy enough, they would hire a servant to do it. If they weren't wealthy enough, they would just provide water for you to do it yourself. So before you come in, just wash your feet off by yourself. But again, foreshadowing, Jesus is not going to let you wash yourself. You can't do it. So Jesus is going to do it for you. But if a host was wealthy enough to hire a servant, they would hire a servant to wash the feet, and it is understood that if you're the servant washing people's feet, because it's so disgusting, it was the lowest ranking servant there was. If you were the dude who gets the job of washing people's feet, you literally were the lowest ranking servant that there was. Now, this is the beauty about being the lowest ranking servant. There's nobody below you. So as Jesus is taking on the image and the picture of the lowest ranking servant, what Jesus is giving us the example of is there is nobody that is disqualified from your love and from your service. And Jesus doesn't just say it, but Jesus actually does it. This is the meal where Jesus identifies Judas as his betrayer. You know that Jesus washes Judas's feet before he identifies him and lets him go? I mean, he could have cleaned 11 people's feet instead of 12 if he just would have got that out of the way first. You want me to wash your feet? I know what you're about to do. I know it's in your heart. I know that it's because of you that I'm about to die. Nope. As Jesus is wearing the image, he is the picture of God's love. He washes Judas's feet before he even broaches the subject of the fact that Judas is actually his betrayer. There's nobody that should be disqualified from my forgiveness, from my service, from my love, from my compassion, from my patience. Jesus, my master, my Messiah, my God, my Lord, who never did anything, if he could take on the image of a servant like that, then so can I. So Jesus, he says, so I'm doing this as an example for you. I want you to go and live like this. So as Jesus now, dirt all over the towel, no outer garment, standing up in the middle of the room, serving them when he should have been the one getting served, saying, I'm doing this as an example for you. This is what it looks like. This is the problem that a lot of Christians have, is because for us, when we approach our calling and when we approach our God-given purpose, most of us, we don't picture ourselves standing in the middle of the room with a dirty towel tied around our waist, washing people's feet. Most of us, I picture my purpose and my calling like this. Hey, God, I'm ready for what you have for me. I've been here a minute. God, what do you got for me? I know I want ministry, God. What's that? Oh, no. I'm waiting for what God prepared for me. I don't have time for that. No, I can't get involved with something like that. I'm sorry. God has huge things for me. God has ministry for me. I'm sorry. I wish I had time. I can't do that right now. I can't be interrupted. God, this is getting a little frustrating, man. I've given my life to you. I really want ministry. I really want opportunity, and I'm waiting. The reason why you're frustrated is because that's not your calling. Because that's not your God-given purpose. And as you're sitting here waiting for God to serve you up with the purpose that you have in mind, God is saying the interruptions are the point. The things that you're ignoring. The things that you're overlooking. This is who I'm surrounding you. You have purpose all around you. You have people all around you that I've put you here to serve, that I've put you here to love, that I have put you here to pray for, to have a burden for, to have compassion for. So if you've been waiting for God to drop this purpose and this passion into your lap, you're going to keep on waiting, and you're going to keep getting more and more frustrated. Because godly purpose doesn't look like you're sitting waiting to be served. Godly purpose is you're laying down anything that's going to impede you from loving somebody. You're willing to embrace the interruption, and you got a towel tied around your waist, and you're like, let's go. How could I help? How could I help? Yeah, my life's not all put together. I'm actually hurting right now, too. I'm actually broken. But if I could help you, I want to help you. I got disappointments. I'm discouraged. But, man, let me encourage you. Let me speak life over you. Let me do that for you. Man, as Christians, we need to stop waiting for a move of God and understand that you are called to be the move of God in somebody else's life. What would this year look like if you said, man, I'm tired of waiting. I'm tired of sitting down. Everything that I'm doing here is the opposite of what Jesus did as an example. I'm ready to stand up. I'm ready to stop worrying about myself and what I look like and things revolving around me, and I'm about to put a towel on, and I'm about to try to give value to somebody else. I'm going to stop waiting for God to do this miraculous move, this supernatural thing, and let me go be the move of God for somebody else. Let me go provide for somebody else. Let me go help and try to bring healing to somebody or encouraging to someone or bring life, speak life to somebody. Let me go pour into somebody else. Maybe you're here and you're like, man, what does that mean? Like, honestly, I'm not about to go into work with a towel tied around my waist asking to wash people's feet. I'm not asking you to do that. So maybe you're like, well, what does that look like practically? Because all of this seems so like, whoa, super spiritual. Jesus was super practical. We make it super spiritual. Jesus was actually very practical. Jesus says this in Matthew 7. Some of you know this as the golden rule. Jesus says, here's a simple rule of thumb, a guide for behavior. Ask yourself what you want people to do for you, then grab the initiative and do it for them. So if you're here and you're like, man, I'm stumped. I would love to serve people. I just can't. I don't really know what to do. Do we have any service projects coming up? Is there anything church organized that I could do? Jesus says, no. You don't need any of that. Actually, what you could do is do this. In your life, think about what you wish you could get from your family. Think about the words of encouragement that you wish somebody would speak to you. Do this. Go grab the initiative and go speak that over somebody else. Picture how you would love for your boss to treat you or your coworker to treat you. And Monday morning, you go in there and you put a smile on and you love on them. You tell them how good of a job they're doing. You speak life into them. Even if you don't agree with them, you speak life into them. Honor them. Submit to them. Think about what you would love for somebody to do to you, and you grab the initiative and you go do it for them. So real quick, I'm going to wrap this up. The band's going to come out. If you want to write this down, you want to write a few things down, we're going to do this. What does it look like to become more like Jesus? If this is the goal, if this is what I'm choosing for this new year, God, I want this to be so much less about me. I want this to be so much more about everybody else. I want to become more like you. Well, what does that require? What does that look like? The 3 steps this. You need to seek the interruption. Not just embrace it, look for it. Pray for it. Jesus created the opportunity to serve people around him. You need to seek the interruption. Second thing is this. Anything that is going to get in the way of you loving people like Jesus, you got to take it off. Anything that's going to impede your ability to serve somebody like Jesus served people, you got to take it off. You got to lay it down. Whether it's self-interest, whether it's pride, whether it's cared too much about what people think of you or this reputation that you've had, whatever it is, you got to lay it down. And the third thing is, put on the towel. Stop trying to just be this believer who's not prideful. Lay your pride down and put humility on. Put the towel around your waist and start seeking opportunities to go serve somebody around you, to go pour into somebody around you. Now, somebody here, we're not going to identify who it is. I'm with you, though. Someone here is like, man, this is awesome. I'm all about others, but what about me? And you feel like a jerk because you're thinking that right now, but that's okay. You're like, who's looking out for me if I'm doing all this for everybody else? I love the fact that Jesus speaks to the result of what happens when you make life about others, when you make calling about others, when you make purpose about others. Jesus says in verse 17, he says, so now put into practice what I've done for you, and you will experience a life of happiness enriched with untold blessing. I really believe that happiness and blessing are tied to humility and service. That happiness is tied to humility. You ever meet somebody who thinks they know it all? They're never happy. You ever meet somebody who's just so into themselves, so into their image, so prideful? They're never happy people. You ever meet somebody who is just like the most humble person you know, and they always got a smile on their face, they always seem to have some joy? I really do believe that happiness is tied to humility. And I believe that when you make your life about others, and when you pour into others, then you're able to receive what God is pouring into you. That as you serve others, that God will pour untold blessing right back into your life. That happiness and blessing are tied to humility and service. If your calling doesn't revolve around others, then it revolves around you. I want to invite you to stand up as we're about to not just wrap this night up, but wrap this service up.